Artificial intelligence is turning the world of archaeology upside down. Now, scientists are sending drones underwater to scan the depths of the seas, the Baltic Sea anomaly, and in one case, underwater scans have been used to solve a mystery.
I get goosebumps all over my body. I have never ever seen anything like that.
In 2011, Swedish maritime researchers scanning the floor of the Gulf of Bothnia detected a structure so unlike anything in the geological record that scientists at Stockholm University spent months trying to explain it. That image, a 60-meter disk of rock sitting at the end of what looked unmistakably like a landing runway, would spark over a decade of argument among scientists who could not agree on what was more disturbing, the object itself, or what its real explanation turned out to mean. In June 2011, a Swedish deep-sea exploration team called Ocean X picked up something on their sonar equipment that none of them could explain. At the bottom of the Gulf of Bothnia, 91 meters below the surface of the Baltic Sea, the screen showed a near-perfect circle, symmetrical, raised off the seabed, with a long, flattened trail stretching behind it, as if something had skidded to a stop. The internet called it the Baltic Sea UFO. The tabloids called it the Millennium Falcon. Scientists called it a geological curiosity. And for 12 years, none of those descriptions were entirely wrong or entirely right. Then, in 2024, a team of researchers from Kiel University published a paper that changed everything. They didn't find the answer people expected. They found something older, something that puts the anomaly, the sonar, the whole story in a context that is genuinely difficult to sit with. The data doesn't care about our comfort. And once you understand what the Baltic seafloor actually is, and what it used to be, you may never look at this story the same way again. To understand why the Baltic Sea anomaly hit the world so hard in 2011, you need to understand the team that found it and the sea they were searching. Peter Lindberg and Dennis Asberg were not scientists in the academic sense. They were professional treasure hunters. Their company, Ocean X Team, based in Sweden, had built an impressive track record finding genuine historical wrecks in the Baltic. 17th century warships, Tsarist-era champagne bottles, cargo lost in World War I. These were not amateurs. They knew what shipwrecks looked like on a sonar screen. They knew what rock formations looked like. They knew what fish shoals and trawler debris and gas vents looked like. What they found on the afternoon of June 19, 2011 didn't look like any of those things. Picture this. It's summer in the far north of the Baltic, but the light is deceptive, pale, flat, Nordic. The research vessel Angelus is moving slowly over cold gray water. Below the hull, a torpedo-shaped side-scan sonar is trailing through the dark, bouncing sound waves off the seafloor 90 meters down. The crew has been doing this for hours. The work is methodical, mostly boring. The sonar image draws itself line by line on a screen, a steady, featureless plane of sediment, occasionally broken by a rock or a ridge. Then, the operator sees it. He calls Lindberg over. On the screen, resolving slowly from static, is a shape that makes no immediate geological sense. Circular, almost perfectly so, a raised rim, a flat top, and trailing behind it for 300 meters, a long, smooth furrow in the seabed, like the drag mark left by something very heavy moving very fast. Lindberg later described his first reaction as cautious. As I was kind of prepared to find a stone or a cliff or an outcrop, he said in a 2012 interview. What he was not prepared for was the shape that kept emerging, sharper and stranger the longer he looked at it. The anomaly was approximately 60 meters wide, larger than a Boeing 747. It rose 3 to 4 meters off the seafloor, and it was sitting right at the end of that long track, as if something had traveled a great distance underwater before coming to rest. The team kept what they found quiet for months. They contacted geologists, marine biologists. When they described what the sonar showed, the response was consistent. Nobody had seen anything like it. In late 2011, they went public. The internet, as it does, immediately supplied an explanation: alien spacecraft. The serious scientists were more careful and more divided. For weeks, the scientific community asked the same question: could this be a natural geological formation? And the answer, almost across the board, was a tentative yes. Maybe, probably. But the details kept getting in the way. The Ocean X team returned to the site in the summer of 2012. With better equipment, more diverse, and the weight of enormous public expectation. What followed became one of the most debated deep-sea dives in recent memory. Finding the anomaly again took hours. Their electronics kept cutting out, cameras reset, A satellite phone stopped working the moment they were positioned directly over the object, then came back on when they moved 200 meters away. Lindbergh reported the pattern across multiple interviews. His co-founder, Dennis Asberg, was more direct. Anything electric out there, and the satellite phone as well, stopped working when we were above the object. Was this evidence of something strange in the rock? Possibly. The more mundane explanation, interference from the equipment itself, or from an unusually high concentration of magnetite in the underlying geology, was never ruled out. No synchronized logs were released to verify the claimed pattern of disruption. What the divers did find, when they finally descended to the object, was striking in its own right. The surface was black, not dark, black. One diver described it as looking burnt. Ridges crossed the flat top at regular intervals. Some sections had what looked like right-angle edges. There were 2 holes in the upper surface, one about 30 centimeters across and one nearly 2 meters wide. The larger one had what appeared to be a square formation built around it. The divers collected rock samples from the debris field surrounding the object. Those samples were sent to Volker Bruchert, an associate professor of geology at Stockholm University. Bruchert's findings, published in 2012, were not what the alien hypothesis crowd wanted to hear, but they were not as simple as the debunkers claimed either. Most of the samples were granite, gneiss, and sandstone, exactly what you'd expect in a glacial basin. But there was one anomaly within the anomaly, a loose fragment of basalt, hardened volcanic rock. Bruchert noted it was out of place on the seafloor, but not unusual. He concluded that glacial processes could account for both the feature and the samples. Possibly these rocks were transported there by glaciers, he told Lev Science. The black coating the divers described as burnt, Bruchert and colleagues at Stockholm University identified it as limonite, a naturally occurring iron hydroxide that forms when iron-rich minerals are exposed to oxygen-poor water over thousands of years. Not burnt, not alien, ancient, rusted, slowly, in the dark. That alone should have closed the story. It didn't. The team sat together on the deck of the Ankylos that evening, the Baltic light still pale and gold at 10 o'clock. Nobody quite knew what to say. The glacial hypothesis, the idea that the anomaly is simply a drumlin, a hill of compacted sediment shaped by the movement of an ancient glacier, is the scientific consensus, and it's almost certainly correct. Finnish planetary geomorphologist Jarmo Korteniemi examined the formation and was unequivocal. The runway wasn't a skid mark left by a crash landing. It was part of a larger group of similar ridges across the bed of the Bothnian Sea. The same direction, the same geometry, formed by the same force, ice moving slowly south, over 10,000 years ago, grinding rock into streamlined hills called drumlins, then releasing them as the glaciers retreated and the basin filled with water. This is where a skeptic rebuttal is worth addressing directly, because a lot of online coverage of this story treats the glacial explanation as a kind of institutional dismissal, as if scientists said glaciers and walked away without doing the work. That's not what happened. Hanuman Singh, a researcher at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in Massachusetts, one of the most respected marine science facilities on the planet, looked specifically at the sonar image. His conclusion was technical, but important. The sonar Ocean X used was a side-scan instrument designed for finding shipwrecks, not mapping geological detail. And when Singh examined the raw data, he found something called crosstalk. One sonar channel was electrically contaminating the other. You can see it in the image itself. The circular formation appears mirrored faintly on the opposite side of the scan. That shouldn't happen with a properly calibrated instrument. It means the image contains distortions. Don Fornari, a marine geologist also at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, I said plainly, I would not place too much confidence in any interpretation until better processing is done. So the instrument was flawed. The image was distorted. The rock samples were consistent with glacial deposits. The runway was a drumlin. The black surface was oxidized iron. Case closed. Except for one thing. If this formation was created 10,000 years ago by a retreating glacier, what was this place 10,000 years ago? And what was living here when the ice pulled back and left this structure behind? This is the detail that keeps researchers up at night. In the fall of 2021, a group of students from Kiel University in Germany were on a research vessel in the Bay of Mecklenburg, a stretch of water on the southern edge of the Baltic Sea. They were practicing marine geophysical survey techniques, learning how to map the seabed with echo sounder equipment, routine training, the academic equivalent of a driving lesson. The data came in the next morning. When the students and their instructor, geophysicist Jacob Gearson, downloaded the images, they went quiet. On the seafloor, 21 meters below the surface, running for nearly a kilometer in an almost perfectly straight line, was a wall. Not a natural ridge, not a cluster of rocks, a wall, 1,670 individual stones, ranging from tennis ball size to over a meter across, placed side by side in a continuous line. The larger immovable boulders anchored the structure at intervals. The smaller stones, sized to be carried by human hands, filled the gaps between them. Gearson's team spent the next 3 years studying it. They sent down cameras. They analyzed sediment samples. They ran the data through every natural formation model they had. The findings were published in February 2024 in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, one of the most prestigious scientific journals in the world. The Blinker Wall, as they named it, after a nearby underwater ridge called Blinker Hill, was built by human beings, Paleolithic hunter-gatherers, between 11,700 and 9,900 years ago. It predates Stonehenge by 6,000 years. It predates the Karnak stones of France. It is, by current evidence, the oldest human-made megastructure ever found in Europe, and it is sitting on the floor of the Baltic Sea. Berit Eriksson, a prehistoric archaeologist at the University of Kiel who spent decades studying the people who arrived in northern Europe as the ice retreated, reviewed the evidence with increasing disbelief and then increasing conviction. She told NPR she kept thinking of Sherlock Holmes. When you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Then she added, I'm running out of things to eliminate in terms of natural stuff. That's my problem. Eriksson concluded the structure was a hunting drive lane. The Paleolithic people of the Baltic coast had built a wall to guide reindeer into a bottleneck, funneling the herds toward a lake or narrow strait where hunters could kill them with spears. It was organized. It was coordinated. It required hundreds of people working together over many seasons, moving thousands of stones by hand. If you're finding this as extraordinary as the researchers did, a like on this video genuinely helps this channel keep investigating stories like this one. Ashley Lemke, an underwater archaeologist at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, has found near-identical structures in Lake Huron. She confirmed the research was strong, and she said something that reframes this entire story. We always think of Stone Age people as on the brink of starvation, trying to scrape a living out of the landscape. And that's just not true. People in Europe were building things before Stonehenge, before these more classical structures that we think of. An advanced, organized, sophisticated civilization on what is now the floor of the Baltic Sea. There's no easy way to say what comes next. The Baltic Sea is young. It is not ancient in the way people imagine ocean floors to be ancient. 10,000 years ago, there was no Baltic Sea, not as we know it. The basin that now holds it was dry land, or, in places, freshwater lakes and marshes left behind by retreating glaciers. The last great ice sheets of the Weichselian glaciation, which had covered northern Europe in walls of ice kilometers thick, were pulling northward. As they melted, they released catastrophic quantities of water into the world's oceans. Sea levels were rising, not quickly by human standards, not year to year, but over centuries, inexorably. The coastlines were moving inland. The people who built the Blinker Wall were living on that land. They hunted reindeer along a lakeside. They organized their communities well enough to construct kilometer-long structures. They likely had settlements, traditions, burial practices, knowledge systems passed down through generations. We don't know their names. We don't know their language. We have almost none of their tools, their art, their bones, because everything they left behind is now submerged under 20 meters of seawater, slowly compressed under centuries of sediment. Around 8,500 years ago, the Baltic Basin flooded permanently. It happened in geological time, fast enough to be catastrophic across generations, even if no single person watched the sea rise in a day. The land that these people had hunted, built, and lived on for thousands of years ceased to exist. This is where the Baltic Sea anomaly takes on a different weight. The anomaly, the 60-meter circular formation at 61 degrees north, sitting at 91 meters depth, was shaped by glaciers over 10,000 years ago. When those glaciers melted, they left behind not just rock formations. They left behind an exposed landscape, an inhabitable landscape, a landscape that people moved into, settled, and began to master. The drumlin the Ocean X team found, it wasn't just a geological curiosity. It was the floor of a world that no longer exists. A world where people walked on ground that is now nearly 100 meters underwater, where the wind was cold and the reindeer were plentiful, and nobody knew that the sea was coming. The first civilization in the Baltic didn't end. It drowned. Let's step back and consider the full weight of what the evidence is actually saying. The Baltic Sea anomaly is, almost certainly, a natural geological formation. A drumlin shaped by ice, a remnant of the last great glaciation. Volker Bruchard and Jarmo Korteniemi were right. The sonar equipment was flawed. The runway is a ridge formed by moving glaciers. The rock is ordinary. The equipment failures were likely coincidence or interference. And none of that is the end of the story, because the terrifying part of the Baltic Sea anomaly was never the object itself. It was the context. The real revelation is what the Baltic Sea floor represents, and what is almost certainly still down there, waiting. Some researchers have proposed that the Blinker Wall is not an isolated discovery. It is a sample. Jacob Gearson's team explicitly noted in their 2024 PNAS paper that the Bay of Mecklenburg has the potential to reveal further archaeological evidence of equal or greater significance. They don't rule out the possibility of a second wall, buried under later sedimentation. If weapons, tools, or animal remains were recovered at the site, they wrote, it could reveal information about the duration and sophistication of the culture that built it. What we are likely looking at is the very edge of something much larger. The coastlines of the prehistoric Baltic, the zones where Paleolithic communities would have clustered, near fresh water, near hunting grounds, near navigable shores, are now the seafloor, and we have barely looked. One controversial but serious interpretation, offered by a number of underwater archaeologists working in the Baltic and North Sea regions, is that the scope of pre-flood human habitation in northern Europe has been systematically underestimated. Most of what we know about the Paleolithic people of this region comes from sites on high ground, caves, hilltop camps, inland river valleys, places that survived the flood, the settlements that didn't survive, the coastal communities, the lakeshore camps, the sophisticated hunting installations like the Blinker Wall are not in our archaeological record because they are not on land. They are in the sea. This is not fringe thinking. It is the position of mainstream archaeology. Ashley Lemke at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee has built an entire research program around underwater prehistory. Vincent Gaffney, an archaeologist at the University of Bradford in the United Kingdom, Tarhi has spent years documenting the Doggerland region, the vast plain that once connected Britain to continental Europe before it was flooded after the last ice age. His conclusion? We are missing entire chapters of human history because we are looking for them in the wrong place. The Baltic Sea floor may contain the remains of dozens, possibly hundreds of prehistoric communities, villages, ritual sites, technology, evidence of human complexity that we currently cannot account for because it's sitting under 20, 50, 90 meters of water. And here is where the story connects to the present in a way that demands attention. Of course, there is a simpler framing of all of this. The Baltic anomaly is a rock. The Blinker Wall is a hunting wall. Human prehistory is messy and incomplete. And the gaps in our knowledge will be filled gradually through careful scientific work. That is accurate. That is measured. But if we follow this evidence to its logical conclusion, if we accept that a rising sea, fed by melting glaciers, swallowed an entire inhabited landscape 8,500 years ago, then we are no longer talking only about the past. The mechanism that drowned the Blinker Wall civilization is the same mechanism that climate scientists are currently measuring, not with a sonar on a fishing vessel, with satellites, with tide gauges, with deep ocean temperature sensors. The glaciers are melting again. The sea is rising again, not at the rate of the post-glacial period, not yet, but in the same direction. The Baltic Sea is a record of what happens when that process completes. A civilization-grade landscape, several 100,000 square kilometers of inhabited coast, simply disappears beneath the water. The people who lived there aren't in history books. They aren't in museums. They are barely in the archaeological record at all, because the archaeological record requires dry land. Some scholars argue this connection between the drowned prehistoric Baltic and our current climate trajectory is the most important thing the anomaly story has to teach us. Not what the object is, but what the ocean floor tells us about permanence, about how quickly things we build can become things no one finds for 10,000 years. There is something almost unbearable about the Blinker Wall once you sit with it. 11,000 years ago, someone decided to build a wall, not a small wall, a wall nearly a kilometer long. They gathered the stones. They organized the work. They woke up each morning with a specific purpose: to make the wall longer, to close the gap, to complete the structure that would guide the reindeer and feed the community through another winter. They had no idea what was coming. They weren't afraid of the sea. Why would they be? The sea, for them, may have been distant, abstract, a horizon seen from a ridge. The water levels around their lakeshore settlements shifted seasonally. That was normal. That was life. The idea that the sea could one day cover the ridge where they built their wall, cover it by 20 meters, drown it completely, turn it into silence, that idea was not available to them. The Baltic Sea anomaly sits at 91 meters depth. The blinker wall sits at 21 meters, separated by 60 kilometers of water and a few thousand years of geological difference. They are both monuments to the same truth. This was once a place where people lived, where boots crunched on the frost, where fires were lit against a northern cold that knifed through any gap in the shelter, where children were born and hunters returned at dusk. And then the water came, and none of it was recoverable. In 2024, the year the blinker wall paper was published, the journal Nature Climate Change reported that global sea level rise is accelerating, not by a geological margin, by a measurable, documented decade-by-decade increase. The ice sheets of Greenland and West Antarctica, the same kinds of ice sheets that carved out the Baltic Basin during the Weichselian glaciation, are losing mass at rates that would have seemed alarmist even 20 years ago. The Paleolithic hunters of the Baltic didn't cause their flood. Ours is a different story. When Peter Lindbergh pulled up that sonar image in 2011 and saw a circular shape on the seafloor, he was looking at the wrong mystery. The shape was a drumlin. It was always a drumlin, but the drumlin was sitting on the floor of a sea that, not so long ago in geological time, was the homeland of human beings who built permanent structures and organized communities and survived at the edge of a retreating ice age. The anomaly was never the object. The anomaly is the ocean itself. The fact that we look at the Baltic Sea floor and see strangeness. The fact that a piece of ordinary glacial geology triggers a decade of debate. The fact that we have explored less than 5% of the world's ocean floors. That statistic, confirmed by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, is not a curiosity. It is an indictment. We know more about the surface of the moon than about the drowned coastlines of our own species' history. That's worth sitting with. The blinker wall has been down there for 10,000 years in near perfect preservation because the cold, low-oxygen waters of the Baltic are extraordinarily good at protecting what they swallow. The stones are still in place. The wall still runs, stone by stone, for nearly a kilometer. It outlasted the civilization that built it by an order of magnitude. It outlasted every empire that rose in the region, every war, every border, every name that was ever given to this stretch of the northern European coast. It's still there, in the dark. So here is the question that remains after all of it. The Baltic Sea floor holds, by conservative estimate, thousands of years of submerged human prehistory. The blinker wall is 1 kilometer long. It was found almost by accident, by students on a training exercise. If a deliberate, fully resourced survey of the Baltic seafloor were conducted, using modern, high-resolution multi-beam sonar, autonomous underwater vehicles, and the full toolkit of 21st century marine archaeology, what would they find? Or is it possible that we already know the answer to that question in rough outline, and we are not looking because we are not quite ready for what looking would confirm? The Baltic Sea. Anomaly went viral in 2011 because people looked at a blurry sonar image and felt that the world was stranger and bigger than they'd been told. They weren't wrong. They just had the wrong object in frame. The strange thing isn't sitting at 91 meters north of Sweden. The strange thing is the civilization that got swallowed whole and the sea that's rising again, and the fact that the only record of what the Baltic coast looked like at the height of Paleolithic human civilization is sitting right now, undisturbed and mostly unsearched, underwater that is getting warmer every year. If this changed how you see the Baltic Sea story, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because the real question, the one no one seems to be asking loudly enough, is not what made that circle in the Gulf of Bothnia. It's what else is down there, and how much longer we have to find it before the world changes again.